I'm Doug Dawson from CCG Consulting, as she said, and our firm has helped about 200 rural communities get into the broadband business. We do a little bit of everything, but the thing that I think probably separates us from everyone else is we help people figure out how to pay for these networks. And so the topic that I want to talk about today is exactly what she just said, which is how much bandwidth we really need. Because that's probably the first question that I'm always asked whenever I talk to a community that doesn't really have this. So, oh, there it is. Okay. It's not just about speed. We always, everyone always talks in the industry about, I want to have so many megabits per second to my house. There's two other issues that matter just as much. One is the total amount of downloads, and the other is the latency. So I want to talk about those three things today and explain how each of those three things are going to matter going into the future. So as she just said, there's been a gigantic growth in customer demand. Since 1980, the amount of both speeds we need at our home and also the amount of downloads we need at our home has doubled every 3 years. You can almost draw a straight line. It's just an amazing increase. And we tend to forget about that, because every once in a while we get a technology that leaps very far forward, and for a while we think we're good. I remember, and any of you, a lot of you in this audience, not all of you, are old enough to remember the transition from dial-up to when we got our first DSL, and it just felt amazing. We went from 56K to about 1 or 1.5 megabits at our house. That was a 20 to 25% increase, and so that one speed jump felt good for 10 years because it took us that long to grow into that much speed. But all of a sudden, there came a day when that just felt terrible. And so since then, we've increased the speeds a whole lot of other times. Some networks have, and there's an awful lot of folks, unfortunately, in the country still stuck on 1 or 2 or 3 kilobits. So, they are now feeling like they have a terribly inadequate service. And the reason for that is no matter what speed you get, a doubling every 3 years means, you look out 10 years, it's going to be 8 times more demand than it is today. And that's something that is hard for the human brain to grasp. I mean, I know network engineers we run into all the time who design new networks, and they just refuse to grasp this concept. They will say, well, here's how much I need, let's double it, and we're good. And by the time it's built, it's already full. In the 2 years it takes them to build it, it's already full. I mean, if you're going to build a network today, you better be planning for at least 10 years from now, and that means you better be looking at 8 times more data than what you think people need today. Cisco says that rate of speed might finally be slowing here in the U.S. Maybe it's down, it's starting to get closer to doubling every 4 years. That's still unbelievable growth. And there's no reason to think that that's going to slow down. And so whatever you have today and whatever you think about today and whatever you talk to your folks in your community about today, when they say, well, I've got a 10 megabit connection and I'm happy, 10 years from now they're going to be massively unhappy with it, and they're not going to be able to do the things they want. So, speeds will become obsolete, and they will continue to be obsolete. We're now at a time when we're also seeing this giant jump forward again. I mean, people are getting 100 megabit and gigabit services, and very few homes can use that much speed. It's very much the same as the jump we had when we went from dial-up to DSL, but we will eventually grow into it. And unfortunately, there's no technologies that sort of get you there a little bit at a time. We get to the point where you max out the technology of DSL or whatever, and you've just got to make a giant leap forward. And so, and people are, I hear politicians all the time going, well, do we really need a gigabit? And the answer is, no, we don't, but we will. And so, that is a really important point to grasp. If there's any one point to make today, it's that rate of speed, because the growth of the needed speeds is the most important fact of the industry. Everything we talk about, it comes back to that issue. So a very interesting challenge. I took all my folks in my company, including myself, and I just sent out an email. I said, how many internet devices do you think you have at your house? And I quickly went through and I figured, I don't know, I bet I have 15 or 18 or something like that. And I went home and I actually ran room to room and looked at everything, and I had 37 things in my house to talk to the internet. And I would challenge you to do the same thing. It was eye-opening. I mean, there's computers and laptops, smartphones, game boxes, smart TVs, tablets. Our house has 3 Amazon Echoes, a burglar alarm, surveillance camera. My daughter's got a smartwatch. I have a washing machine that talks to the internet, and I haven't the slightest idea what it talks to the internet about. I mean, I truly don't. I tried to disconnect it. I can't even figure out how to do that. And then visitors. I have a teenage daughter. I run my business out of my house, and we have a 60 megabit circuit, and for my business, that's really pretty adequate most of the time. And one day I couldn't receive an email, and it's like, what the heck is the cable company having a problem? I go downtown, and there's 8 of her friends, each on their smartphones watching a different video. They completely wiped my network out. I mean, visitors do matter. And so, you don't design a house just for yourself these days, because everybody walks into your house with devices in their pocket. So, those things matter as well. This is a list of today of basically what the speeds are for various services. And this is per user. And so if you have 3 people using these things at the same time, you need 3 times these numbers. So, just normal web browsing is 1 to 2 megabits a second. Make sure I got the wrong slide. Streaming music is about 1/3 of a megabit. Voice over IP is about 2/10. An SD video, which actually hardly anyone watches anymore because they're not very good high quality, is 1 to 3 megabits. HD video, which is what Netflix always tries to automatically give you, is 4 to 6 megabits. 4K video, which is coming. I just bought a 4K TV, and I watched the first 4K video the other day. It's amazing. It's like, wow, this brings a movie studio into my living room. That's 15 to 20 megabits just to watch one show. So if you don't have that much speed at your house, you can't watch those things. Gaming, 1 to 3 megabits. Online video conferencing like Skype, 1 to 3 megabits. And big file downloading as much as 50 megabits, just as a minimum speed. And you'd be surprised in your community how many folks you have like that. Architects, doctors are a huge one. If a doctor at their house wants to look at x-rays or MRIs, they don't want to wait. Remember the old days when you had dial-up and you had to wait, 30 seconds or 2 minutes just to look at a newspaper picture? That's what doctors are looking at when they have to download big files. And so they need fast speeds. And so another big user in every community is photographers. They send and receive gigantic files all the time. And so there are some home businesses that just need gigantic amounts of data that we can't forget about. But the important thing is, as much as those speeds, you can sort of in your mind add those together and see how much data you think your house has. It's not as simple as that. Because packets interfere. If you download any one of those things and that's all you're doing, those speeds on that last chart are the speeds that you're going to need. However, you start doing 2 of those things, and those 2 functions interfere with each other a little bit. You do 6 or 8 or 10 of those things at the same time, and they interfere with each other tremendously. And so what happens in the internet world is the internet will send you packets for each one of the things you're trying to do, and then as they interfere with each other, some of them don't get there, or they don't get put in the right place. So your computer goes back out to the internet and asks for things again. So as you run more devices, you may end up with 15, 20, or 30% extra bandwidth needed just to enable to do multiple things at the same time. And so after adding up all your needs of the house, you got to add on 15 or 20 or 30% overhead to actually get those things done. And you just can't forget that, it's not just, I'm sitting on my computer. My smartphone uses a tremendous amount of data. You forget about it all the time. Video is now everywhere. You go to a social media site, every 3rd thing on there is a video from somebody. News sites, advertising. I mean, every little corner of every website I visit has a video running it anymore. The other thing to remember is that Wi-Fi also has its overhead. There's an internet, there's a network between your ISP and your house. That's where those packet interferences come from. Within your house, the same thing happens again. If I'm using all of these devices on Wi-Fi, I now have another set of these same overheads, because in order to get out to all my devices, I get another set of those same kind of interferences. That alone, that can add another 15 or 20 or 30% onto your needed bandwidth. The way Wi-Fi works is when 2 devices ask to use the Wi-Fi network at the same time, and what the Wi-Fi network does is it shuts down completely for a microsecond, and then it tries to reinitiate. It does not like trying to do 2 things at once, and so it shuts down, and then it reinitiates and gives one of those 2 services some packets for a minute, and then as the second one tries again, it shuts down, and so It shuts down and restarts over and over and over again very, very quickly, but that adds a whole lot of overhead to your house. And so you take my chart before, and you take all those things, add them together for your house, and then add 15 to 30% overhead for your ISP, add another 15 to 30% for your Wi-Fi network. That's how much bandwidth you need. It's a big number. And when you have not enough bandwidth is when people are very unhappy with their broadband service. We do surveys all the time, and in the last 2 years, we find out that most people are not happy with their home broadband anymore. They don't know why, and these are the reasons why. They blame it on the ISP. The fact is they're trying to do too many things for their broadband. So, pardon me, I have a bit of a cold. The next issue that matters is just how much total download you have. And so this is my house. We're a 3-person household, and we're cord cutters. And so we haven't had cable TV in years. So we have, and this is the amount of monthly downloads that we need. I actually have been tracking this for quite a long time. So our 3 computers together download about 9 gigabits a month. The 3 smartphones, it looks to me like they download about 24 gigabits a month. They actually use a lot more data than my computer does. About 60 hours of web browsing is 9 gigabits, or gigabytes, I'm sorry. 3 social networks, about 8 gigabytes. 60 hours of streaming music is about 3 gigabytes. My daughter's a gamer. We figure that's about 5 gigabytes. And then she has an online school course where she takes her math course online. We figure that's about 10 gigabytes. So that's 68 gigabytes we need every month just to get our basic functions done. And that's not watching any video. And so that's a really large amount of data. And if you would have come back 10 years ago and told somebody that number, including network engineers, they would have thought you were crazy. There's like no way can a house ever use this much data. And we're not that unusual. Of course, we all know, and of course, I think the comment earlier was it's not all about entertainment. Those things were not entertainment, except maybe a little bit of the social networks. They were sort of just getting by. On top of that, then we have video. The average survey from Nielsen said that the average OTT viewer over the top is Netflix and all those sort of services. Each user watches about 49 hours of content a month. That sounds like a lot, but that's about 1.5 hours a day. Of course, some houses watch a whole lot more and some watch none, but that's the average for the country. Cord cutters watch a lot more. My family, we have done the math, and it looks like we watch about 2.3 hours per person a day. And so our total bandwidth at our house is about 700 gigabits. I have my own devices that measure this, but I just moved to Ashville. Comcast used to measure it in Florida when I lived there, and they sent me the total every month, and it came in around that same number. That's a huge amount of data. And a lot of ISPs, even when they give you the good speeds, they put a data cap on you. If I had 150 megabyte data cap, I'd be spending a fortune for this broadband. It's like I would be using 4 times what they want me to use. I'm on Charter right now, and they have a 1 gigabit, and until my daughter goes to college, we're going to threaten to hit that number. She's going to cut me way back down again. But but as we start watching 4K videos, we're probably right back up there. And so the amount. So I think understanding how much actual download you need is probably just as important as understanding the speeds. Last issue is latency. Latency is how much delay it takes for a packet to get from the internet to your house. Every technology has a different latency, and latency really matters. More than anything, this is a rural issue, because in rural areas, even when you get broadband, it's terrible broadband. The latencies are really high, which means you can't do things like voice over IP. You can't have a Skype call. You can't just talk on a Vonage phone. You can't do online training. I mean, the course that my daughter's taking on the internet would not work if you had high latency. I just talked to a woman a couple months ago in Minnesota who thought she had good broadband in her house. She had a 16 megabit DSL circuit, and she went to take her nurse's certification course. She had just finished her education online. In the middle of the course, she got interrupted because of latency, and they don't let you back in. She had to wait 6 more months to take the course again, and she was smart enough to then drive to the Twin Cities and take it on an actually good internet circuit. So, I mean, there's real consequences of having poor latency. You can't watch live on streams, live streaming. So you're not watching football on TV, live games if you have bad internet, even if you have enough speed. And probably the one that matters the most to all of us is working at home. Companies expect people to work at home. If you have bad latency, then you can't do that. The corporate WAN will just kick you right off. Also, a lot of shopping sites are starting to kick you off. They think, they don't think you're a real customer if you don't respond to certain time and questions. So, and so what are the latencies? Fiber has the best. 10 to 20 milliseconds is their latency on a fiber network. Coaxial cable's not bad. It's about double that of fiber. DSL is about triple that of fiber. It's starting to get up to that point where that's starting to become questionable. And then wireless WISPs, a lot of us have fixed point-to-point wireless service. I was on one of those for a decade. At the time, I thought that was a great service, but the latency was pretty high. They're about the same as DSL if there's only one hop. If you're served by a tower that has fiber to it, it's the same as DSL. But in rural areas, what happens is they feed all these towers wirelessly. So they go tower to tower to tower wirelessly. Every one of those hops doubles this speed. And so you might find yourself with a 200 or 300 megabit latency, even if you have a 5 megabit circuit. Cellular data is about 100 milliseconds, which is why it's miserable to read newspaper articles or something on a cell phone. It's just horrible. And then satellite is 550 plus. You can't do anything on a satellite circuit. All those things we talked about, they simply fail. And so, this is just as important as speed and just as important as the amount of downloads. So what's coming next? That's the real question. Something is going to come along and make us double those speeds again, and something's going to come along after that and make us double it again. I think that Hilda mentioned this from your last session. There's a huge growth in machine-to-machine language. Half the stuff coming out of my house, I don't even know what it is. My computer's automatically doing backups. My cell phones are out updating their programs all the time. There's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, I don't even know what my burglar alarm system's doing. It's using data. It's telling somebody something about us. I don't know what it is. Of course, everything there's going to be more and more and more video. I mean, we know it's just going to keep filling up for that. There's a really increased demand to work at home, and so that's going to keep on pushing the network. There's now I think when I first started working in broadband many years ago, they said number one use of broadband is going to be telemedicine, so people can stay at home and not go to see the doctor. That's been 30 years. We're finally starting to see it, though. So, I've actually gone out and talked to some clinics in rural places that are finally doing this. That's going to be a huge thing, especially as, there's a whole lot of pressures that are going to cut down the number of rural doctors. This is going to become more and more important. Demand for monitoring, it sounds like you talked about that the last time, the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things, that's the smart refrigerators and all that stuff that we kind of joke about, but there's a lot of important stuff coming with the Internet of Things. Probably the number one demand for that's going to be farming. Farmers are going to have devices in their fields that are looking at water and insects and the need for to put out fertilizer. And those things are using a huge amount. Each one doesn't use a lot of data, but if you have thousands of them out there, they use a lot of data. We're also looking at smart homes, which is, everything in your house is all connected together. The 4K video, everyone's like, well, that's barely here now, but I guarantee you 5 years from now, that's what Netflix will first offer you. All their shows are filmed in it. All the shows from Amazon are filmed in it. And then virtual reality online. I don't think we're probably more than 10 years away, and I can't wait for this myself, to have the Star Trek holodeck in our houses. And that's going to be a gigantic bandwidth eater. So that's entertainment, but boy, that's really entertainment. So, and so it's going to keep growing. You know, I can't tell you, and nobody can tell you how it's going to double, but it's going to double. So, again, there's my contact info on here. Please read my blog. I have a couple thousand folks who read it a day. They tell me that after reading it for a year or two, that's about the equivalent of a master's in telecom. So I cover every topic you've ever heard about. So, and it's all about rural broadband. So, so I think questions are next, right?
You might want to put that up there on your screen.
Oh, there we go. Yes, sir.
You talked about what's coming next. I heard a guy from a no-gate engineer speak out in Kansas City and said that one of the things that they're trying to prepare for using all the small cells is when it goes to a true 5G, about how much you'll be able to download or need to download on your phone.
Right.
Will eat up, several gigs.
Right. Yeah. What's going to happen is, well, it's a long story. It's going to happen in downtowns way before it happens here in Moorhead, because it's going to take a fiber network that's within a few blocks of each house. So you need a fiber network before you can have 5G. So the answer is, when that's there, though, that's going to really push the demand. So my own personal prediction is we won't see. We're just now finally this year seeing the first true 4G. That's 15 years after it was introduced. So I think 15 years from now we might actually have that. But slowly it'll get there. Every year it'll be a little bit more until it finally gets there. So this is the easy crowd. Yes, sir.
Have you worked in your path with any local governments, whether they be city or county, that have set up utilities specific to broadband?
A whole lot of them. Most of, at least half of all the municipal fiber networks you've heard of are my clients, people like Lafayette, Louisiana, and Chattanooga, and all those folks are people that we helped, but also some very rural ones. We just earlier this year, one of my clients is RS Fiber, which is a cooperative in Minnesota. They call themselves Fiber to the Farm. So they found a way to fund fiber out to corn farmers, and they did it by actually putting in government money to help pay for the network. I mean, local money, they raised a third of the price of the project locally to pay for it. So the answer is I'm finding folks willing to do that. I work with a couple small communities in Michigan who want it so badly, they're going to pay for 100% of the project out of property taxes. I mean, so we're starting to see local communities. I think people are realizing by now that if you don't do it yourself, you're not going to get it. There's no one really knocking on your door to build fiber, and so I think we're going to, to me, it's past now the point of a nice to have to it's a mandatory to have. If you don't have it, your community is going to get left behind. So the answer is here. Just this year, we've done 50 feasibility studies, and those are all rural. Well, 2 of them weren't rural, but they were 48 of those are rural communities who are looking the way to do it. So I think a lot of them are going to find a way to get it done. 10 years ago when I did a feasibility study, they stuck it on the shelf, and now I hand it to them, and they run out and they look for an engineer to get it built. So,
What's the biggest hurdle?
money. Money's the hurdle. Yeah.
Could you elaborate on the RS Fiber project somewhat, because it was multiple communities coming together.
Right.
Would you just on that organizational structure a little bit?
Yeah, that took getting that one organized was one of the hardest things we've ever done, because it was 9 communities and 2 county governments all had to agree on everything. So that was about a 1.5-year process all by itself. And I think the guy who ran it, I think he had something like 400 meetings to get folks to agree. So, but once they all got it agreed on, then it took them a long time to get their funding together. That was another 1.5 years. But now it's being built, and actually now it's about half built, and there's got a whole bunch of customers on it. But it's not an easy undertaking. You know, you do the feasibility study up front, you see if it makes any sense, but then finding the way to pay for it's always the issue. So every time, it's never easy. Mostly around anywhere from 40 to 60,000. That includes an engineering study to figure out the cost of the network. It includes building business plans, and it usually includes some educational stuff for the community to understand what the heck you're doing, and sometimes that includes getting surveys done. So.
Right here.
Mhm.
What do you see long-term for big data industry supporting the wireless be the way to go, or will it always be hard?
Well, again, good wireless is going to require a fiber backbone. You know, when they're talking about in urban areas going to 5K is the way to get to homes, that's what, years ago, we called that a fiber to the curb network. So you build fiber in the networks, you put these big 5G transmitters on poles, and now you don't put wires to the houses, you just shoot gigabit speeds into the houses. But those transmitters have to be within a couple hundred feet of the houses. And so the answer is, you know, that's almost the same cost as building fiber network. It's really not very different today. And so, so I think that it'll evolve to that because, you know, one of the worst costs of building a fiber network is what we call stranded investment. You get half the folks in the community on the fiber network, but when some of them move away or can't afford it anymore, you can't take their wire back. You already spent the money on it. And in a wireless network, you just turn them off and you turn it on to somebody else. So that it's a real cost saver over time, but it requires fiber to be close to it. We're already seeing those networks in the city because, you know, the big guys like Google are using it to serve apartment buildings. They just shoot a gigabit into the roof, and then they distribute it to all the apartments. But, you know, there's nobody doing anything like that yet for homes, and that's going to be just as expensive as building fiber networks to the homes. You know, maybe that cost will come down over time, but we're not anywhere close to that yet. So. Yeah, if you can do a gigabit over wireless, the only question there would be the safety, the reliability of the equipment. And so what we think will happen mostly is a large business will want a fiber connection. They will also want a wireless connection. That way, if either one goes down, they don't get cut off. But, you know, but just to go wireless equipment's not going to be as reliable as fiber. It just won't. I mean, it just never will be. Because it's external, sitting outside, things can happen to the antennas. And so, you know, the answer is it'll be a really good broadband. If you can shoot a 1 or 2 gigabit pipe data on wireless, that's a great thing to do. Will that be the only solution? No. So, you know, it'll be a good solution, though. But it's only going to happen where there's already fiber pretty close to those big businesses. So. Yes,
I mean, even if you look at, in terms of LTE connectivity, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
So I sound like the Verizon guy. So even in terms,
you do have a nice echo.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's true. In terms of LTE connectivity, even, you know, you talk about every 3 years the demand doubles. If you look at Appalachian Wireless in Pikeville, they deployed 20 megahertz of band 13 LTE, and that took from about 2013, 2014 till about this past early part of the year to hit capacity. So then they deployed another 20 megahertz of band 4 LTE.
It took a year, right?
And no, it's already at capacity, and that's with 3 cell sites. AT&T deployed 60 megahertz of LTE on 4 different bands, and it's at capacity. So it's, you know, small cells, like you said.
Well,
And
it's actually a good point you brought up because the issue of doubling the demand every 3 years is not true for cell phone data. It's doubling every year right now.
yes,
Because it's sort of catching up to the rest of the industry. So that little piece of the industry is growing way faster. And so, yeah, you can't hardly make a cell phone tower. You can't even hardly stock it good enough with all the electronics there are to work today.
yeah. So
Yeah,
you know, macro sites in general, you know, macro sites, that's a thing of the past, and now
right.
Verizon's deploying small cells everywhere. You have to, and
Yeah.
even in these rural towns, because
Right.
for some people, LTE connectivity, that's it until we can get fiber into the areas, and it's
Right.
simply better. So yeah, it's one of your thoughts on that. I mean, even small cells in rural areas, I think, could meet, you know, short-term demand.
Well, I mean, one of my clients is a small town in Missouri, and the local cell company came in and asked them to put up 4 little small cells, and that's a town probably a third of the size of this one. So it's a town where half the streets don't even have sidewalks, and you know, it doesn't look like the kind of place that needs that, but they decided that was the only way to really provide the bandwidth there. So that gives them, they still have the tall cell site, they now have 4 of those little ones. That's 5 cell sites to serve one little town. And that's just LTE, so yes, sir.
I've been pushing the local carriers and the national carriers to do small cells because I think that's the only way we're going to be able to do it.
Well, right now that technology is expensive, And so that's the real question for them is when they put one of those up, they want a whole bunch of people around it, and most places there's not enough people around it yet for them, in their minds, to justify it. So they're doing the very densest places first. They will eventually get those to rural America, but rural America is always last on their list. I mean, that's the way it works. So I saw a question back there.
Based on your experience and the folks you've worked with, do you recommend municipally owned fiber networks? And also, could you tell the crowd exactly how fortunate we are in Kentucky to be able to even pursue that? Because in North Carolina, after the Pine Tops debacle, there's actually, 19 states where you can't do that? 22 states where you can't do that. So do you see that? That's what we're trying to do in Moorhead. We want to own our own and pay for it with revenue bonds.
The answer is, there's no easy answer. The answer is, I've never gone to any city that's the same as another one. Every place is unique. And so if you can find a private partner to help you, that's always preferable. If somebody else other than you puts some of the money in, that's a better thing. So public-private partnerships are usually the first preferred choice. Unfortunately, most of us don't live next to anybody willing to put money into it. But there are a lot of communities that are finding that. And so that's probably the number one option. After that, if you don't do it yourself, you're not going to get it. Now, in that model, we still see two big different paths to take. One is the city builds it and then you operate it. You become your own utility. But an awful lot of cities are choosing then to hire an ISP to run it for them. It's like, I don't really want to learn how to run this business. I'll build the network, I'll pay for it, but I'll hire this vendor to come in and operate it for me. Yes, sir. Ammon is open to everybody. You could just hire one. So far, nobody's found a way to make open access work. Ammon can make it work because the homeowner pays for the network. They're not raising any money. But if you raise the money, at least having an RS Fiber is operated by an ISP. They don't operate their own network. So that's really your three choices. Open it up to everybody, get one ISP partner, or do it all yourself. It's never obvious which of those is the right answer till you look. But they're all three valid ways to get it done. So.
You mentioned about the stranded fiber where you run the fiber to the home, but the homeowner then abandons it. I know that there are some models and communities in which the partnership of running the fiber to the home is done by the utility so that they could have smart meters. I was wondering, with your work in other communities, how much have you seen that partnership happening so that there is more than one reason to put fiber to the home?
Unfortunately, that's no longer a good reason. 10 years ago, when the smart grid started, there was a gigantic debate about whether they should go wireless or wired. And at that time, there were vendors pushing both of those solutions. You can't find a vendor today who will sell you a fiber solution for smart grid. The whole electric industry went wireless, and so that's where all the technology went. And so right now, you can still do it at the home. It costs 3 to 4 times more money at the home just to do the smart grid piece, because you have to find somebody to make something called a collar that would tie the fiber into the electric meter, and nobody makes those. I mean, they'll make them for you on a custom basis, but there's no mass-produced company who makes those. So wired smart grid has simply been bypassed. It's no longer on the table, and so it's no longer a reason. The other issue with it is you have to build to every home to make that possible, and if only half of those people buy broadband, it's really hard to justify building fiber to the home just to read their electric meter. I mean, economically, you just cannot justify that. Chattanooga justified that because the federal government gave them a whole lot of money during the stimulus grant, but that's the only way to make that work. So.
But let me follow up on that, because that's a good question. Wouldn't the smart grid be one component of it? But it can't be because of the collar. I do have people that run to that collar issue. Right. So there'd have to be a wireless connection.
Yeah, I mean.
But then you could do multiple applications.
I mean, you certainly, if you build a fiber network, the electric company's going to want to buy those wireless connections from you, but that's not a giant revenue driver. But it's one more customer to help pay for the network. I mean, it's not a zero revenue stream, but it's not, you don't do it to every house with a wire. That's just not a good solution. So. And on top of that, then you go, what about the water meters? Well, you know where they're at? They're in the front of the yard. Getting fiber to the water meters is really expensive. So it's just not taking that path. We all hoped it would, but it didn't go that way. So, all righty.
More questions?
Well, thank you all very much. You feel free to contact me at those addresses, and I'd love to hear from some of you. So.
Thank you very